Come here a minute. Get down on your knees with me, right there in the dirt, and put your hand flat on the soil between your tomatoes. Under your palm, in that 1 square foot of ground, there are weed seeds, not a few. Researchers who actually counted them in Midwest fields found anywhere from about 50 seeds to nearly 15,000 of them packed into a single square foot of soil, most of them just lying there in the dark, alive, waiting for one thing, a little light. And every time you reach down and yank a weed out by the roots, you hand it to them. I know that sounds backward. You pulled the weed is gone, the bed looks clean, job done. But 3 weeks later, that same patch is greener than ever, thicker than before, and you're out there on your knees again, wondering what you did wrong. You didn't do anything wrong exactly. You just did the one thing the old market gardeners learned never to do, back when a family's winter depended on that plot, and nobody had time to weed the same row twice. They didn't pull, and by the end of these next 20-odd minutes, you're going to understand exactly why, and you're going to know the 5 things to do instead, so you can spend a lot less of your summer hunched over pulling the same weeds out of the same ground. Stay with me to the last one, because that 5th method is the trick the old-timers used to make a weed patch quieter every single year instead of louder, and almost nobody does it anymore. If you like the sound of that, do me a favor and hit subscribe. This channel is a quiet corner of the internet where we dig up the growing wisdom folks used to know by heart, and then we look at what the soil scientists have figured out about why those old ways actually worked. Old hands, new proof. That's the whole idea. So, let's talk about weeds and why pulling them is the hardest, slowest, least effective way there is. Here's the piece nobody tells you. When you pull a weed, you're not just removing a plant. You are digging. You're a little one-person plow. Your fingers go into the ground. They break it open. They turn the soil over. And in that half a second, sunlight touches soil that hasn't seen the sun in years, maybe a decade. And that flash of light is a wake-up call for every seed it lands on. This isn't folklore. This is one of the most beautifully proven things in weed science, and it has a name: photodormancy. A huge number of our common weed seeds, lamb's quarters, pigweed, purslane, chickweed, all those little broadleaf troublemakers, are built so they will not sprout in total darkness. They can sit 6 inches down for years, perfectly alive, and never green up, because down there it's black as midnight, and the seed is smart enough to know that a seed that sprouts 6 inches deep in the dark will die before it ever reaches the sun. So it waits. It waits for proof that it's near the surface, and the proof it waits for is light. There was a USDA scientist named Doug Bueller, worked out of the soil tillage lab up in Minnesota, and he ran an experiment that I think about every time I pick up a hoe. He and his crew borrowed military night vision goggles, and they tilled cornfields in absolute darkness, total black. Then they tilled matching fields in the middle of the afternoon. Same soil, same everything, the only difference being whether light hit the dirt while it was being turned. The fields worked in daylight came up thick with weeds. The fields worked in the dark. For the small seeded broadleaf weeds, emergence dropped by 50 to 80%. Common lamb's quarters came up about 70% less, just from keeping the light off the soil. And there were German researchers before him, Hartmann and Nezadal, who found something even more startling. On heavily worked ground, they got weed cover to drop from around 80% down to 2% just by doing the cultivation at night. 2%. Same soil, same weeds sleeping in it. The only thing they changed was the light. Now, I'm not telling you to go out and weed your garden at midnight in the dark, though if your neighbors already think you're peculiar, be my guest. What I'm telling you is what that research means for your hands. Every single time you rip a weed out and open up that soil in broad daylight, you are flashing the wake-up light on the seeds underneath. You pulled one weed and you just triggered 10 to take its place. That's the trap. That's why the bed comes back thicker. You're not clearing the seed bank. You're feeding it sunlight and turning it loose. So drop the yanking. Here's what to do instead. Number 1. Slice, don't pull. Stop grabbing the top of the weed and hauling the whole root system out of the ground, and start cutting the weed off right at the soil line instead. Right at the crown, that little spot where the stem meets the dirt. You take a sharp hoe, you skim it along just under the surface, and you sever the top of the plant clean away from its roots without ever really opening the ground up. The soil stays closed, the seeds stay in the dark, and that weed, for the most part, is done, because a young annual weed cut off at the crown has no way to rebuild itself. It bleeds out its energy trying, and it quits. Now the tool matters here, and this is where a lot of folks go wrong. The heavy chopping hoe your granddad had hanging in the garage, the one shaped like a little garden shovel, that's a digging hoe, and digging is exactly what we're trying to avoid. What you want is a scuffle hoe. Some folks call it a stirrup hoe or a hula hoe because the blade is a loop shaped like a stirrup and it wiggles a little as you push and pull it. You run it back and forth just under the surface, barely a half-inch down, and it shaves weeds off at the neck while it glides. You walk down the row, you push and pull, and the weeds fall over behind you like a barber went through. It is the single most satisfying hour you will spend in a garden, and your back will thank you because you're doing it standing up. Number 2, and this one's about timing more than technique. Hoe them small, hoe them when they're threads. There's an old phrase for this that I love, the white thread stage. When a weed seed first sprouts, before you can even really see a green leaf, it sends up this tiny, pale, thread-like shoot, white or the faintest green, thinner than a sewing thread. That is the moment. A weed at the white thread stage has almost no root, no stored energy, nothing. You barely have to touch it. If you run that scuffle hoe across the top of a bed on a dry, sunny morning when the weeds are just threads, you'll kill a whole flush of them in about 90 seconds, and they'll be dried up and gone by noon before they ever knew they were alive. The mistake, and I made it for years, is waiting. You look at the bed, you think, they're small, I'll get them this weekend. And by the weekend, they've got real roots, real leaves, a real grip on the soil, and now the only way to get them out is to pull, which, as we just covered, wakes up the whole nursery underneath. Little and often beats big, and rarely every time. 10 minutes with a hoe once a week beats 2 hours of pulling once a month, and it isn't close. While we're here, do me a favor. Drop a comment and tell me the worst weed you fight in your garden. I want to know what you're up against. For me, it's bindweed, And we'll get to that devil in a minute, because it breaks all these rules and I don't want you making it worse. Number 3, cover the ground, mulch. Everything we've said so far comes down to one idea. Weed seeds need light to wake up, so the laziest, most powerful thing you can possibly do is take the light away. Put a blanket over the seed bank and it stays asleep. That's all mulch really is. It's a lid on the jar. 2, 3 inches of something over your bare soil. Straw, shredded leaves, grass clippings that haven't gone to seed, wood chips on your paths and around your perennials, even a few sheets of cardboard under the pretty stuff. It doesn't have to be fancy. What it has to do is block the sun from ever hitting that dirt. And here's the beautiful part, the part the old-timers understood in their bones, even without knowing the word photodormancy. Mulch doesn't just smother the weeds you can see. It keeps the 10,000 seeds you can't see from ever getting the signal to grow in the first place. You're not fighting weeds anymore. You're just not letting them start. I mulched my main tomato bed heavy one June. First year I really committed to it. 3 good inches of chopped leaves I'd saved from the fall. My neighbor, 2 doors down, did not. By August, I was pulling maybe 1 weed a week out of that bed, almost as an afterthought, and he was out there every Saturday morning, on his knees in the sun, losing the fight. Same weeds, same street. One of us had put the lid on the jar. Number 4 flows right out of that. Never leave the soil naked. Nature will not tolerate bare dirt. It just won't. A patch of open ground is an insult to the natural order, and something green will always rush in to cover it. And if you don't choose what that something is, the weeds will choose for you. So beat them to it. Where you're not mulching, plant thick. Space your lettuces and your beans and your greens close enough that once they fill in, their own leaves shade the ground between them, and a shaded soil surface is a soil surface where weed seeds stay quiet. The old kitchen gardeners crowded their beds on purpose. They knew a full bed is a self-weeding bed. Out in the bigger spaces, between rows or in a plot that's resting, they'd sow a cover crop, buckwheat in the summer, clover, something to hold that ground with living roots and living leaves so the weeds never got an opening. Living mulch, we call it now. They just called it good sense. Bare soil is the enemy. Green over every inch, on your terms, is the goal. Now, before I give you that 5th method, the quiet one, I've got to stop and separate 2 very different kinds of weeds for you, because everything I've told you so far is aimed at annual weeds, and if you use it on the other kind, you'll make your life worse. Annual weeds live one season. They sprout, they grow, they throw seed, they die, and their whole game is that seed bank in the soil. Chickweed, lamb's quarters, purslane, crabgrass, most of what fills a bed in a week. For those, everything I've said is gold. Slice them, shade them, starve the seed bank of light. But then you've got the perennials, and these are a different animal entirely. Dandelion, dock, and the 2 that haunt me, bindweed and creeping Charlie. These don't live and die in a season. They store their life down in a deep taproot or in running underground stems called rhizomes. And here is the cruel joke. If you slice a perennial like bindweed off at the surface, or worse, if you grab it and pull and it snaps, every little piece of root you leave behind, and you will leave pieces behind, can sprout a brand new plant. You don't have 1 bindweed anymore. You chopped it into 5, and now you've got 5. I have watched a man triple his bindweed problem in an afternoon of vigorous weeding, and that man was me. So, for the true perennials, the rules flip. This is the one place where careful digging earns its keep. On a dandelion, you want to get down under the crown and lift that whole long taproot out in one piece, all the way to the tip, because any chunk left behind grows back. There's a narrow forked tool made just for it. For the runners like bindweed, you don't beat it by yanking, you beat it by patience, by cutting it back to the ground over and over the moment it shows a leaf, so it can never feed that deep root, and eventually the root runs out of savings and starves. Persistence, not violence. And yes, on those two, when you dig, you will let some light into the soil and wake some annual seeds. That's the trade. Deal with the deep-rooted devil first, then mulch over the wound to put the annuals back to sleep. Know your enemy before you reach for it. That's the whole lesson. Little side note while I've got you thinking about these plants. A good number of the weeds we've been talking about are actually food. Purslane is one of the best things you can eat straight out of a summer garden, and folks have cooked dandelion greens for centuries. I'll only say this, and I'll say it every time it comes up on this channel. If you ever plan to eat a wild plant, you be 100% certain of what it is first. Some good plants have dangerous look-alikes, and certain isn't the same as pretty sure. Get a proper field guide or find somebody local who really knows, and confirm it before a single leaf goes in your mouth. That's not me being nervous. That's just how the old foragers stayed old. All right, method number 5, the one I asked you to wait for, the stale seed bed. This is the master move, the thing the old market growers did that almost nobody in a backyard does anymore. And once it clicks, you'll wonder why you ever gardened another way. Here's the idea. Instead of fighting weeds all season long, you trick them into showing up early, all at once, on your schedule, and then you wipe out that whole flush before you ever plant your crop. You turn their own biology against them. You do it like this. A couple of weeks before you're going to plant a bed, you get the soil ready, just like you're about to sow, raked smooth and watered. Then you walk away. You do nothing, and that warm, moist, prepared soil is an irresistible invitation, so up comes a green haze of weed seedlings, a whole flush of them from that top layer of the seed bank, all rushing to fill the ground you prepared. You let them come, and when they're up at that little white thread or just past stage, you take your scuffle hoe and you skim the whole bed shallow, barely scratching the surface, and you kill every last one of them in one pass. Shallow, mind you. You are not digging. You cut that first wave off at the neck without opening the ground and dragging up a second wave to replace it. Now, and this is everything, now you plant your actual crop into that same bed, and you plant it as gently as you can, disturbing the soil as little as possible. What have you done? You've drained the top of the seed bank, the part that was ever going to bother you this season, and you did it before your vegetables were even in the ground, competing with them. Your carrots come up into soil where the weeds already had their party and already got shown the door. I've grown carrots in a stale seed bed row that needed one light weeding all summer, right next to a row. I rushed into the ground the old way that I fought until frost. Same seed, same soil. One had the wisdom in front of it. That right there, that patient, unhurried, work with the plant instead of against it approach. That is the whole spirit of the old way of gardening. They weren't stronger than us or more stubborn than us. They were smarter about when to move and when to wait. And modern soil science has done nothing in 100 years but prove them right over and over. So, let me hand you the whole thing in one basket, the cheat sheet, so you've got it before your next trip out to the garden. Stop pulling annual weeds because pulling turns the soil, flashes light on the seed bank, and wakes 10 seeds for every weed you removed. Instead, get yourself a scuffle hoe and slice them off at the crown with the soil staying closed. Do it while they're tiny, at the white thread stage, little and often, not big and rarely. Then cover every bit of bare ground with 2 or 3 inches of mulch to keep the light off the seeds you can't see, and plant thick or sow a cover crop so nothing sits naked and open. Treat the deep-rooted perennials, your bindweed and your dandelion, completely differently, with careful full digging or patient repeated cutting, never a rushed snap that multiplies them. And before you plant a new bed, run the stale seed bed. Wake the weeds early, hoe them off shallow in one pass, then plant gently into ground you've already emptied. Do those things, and I promise you, one season to the next, your weeding gets quieter instead of louder. The bed that used to eat your Saturdays starts asking for 10 minutes a week, and you'll have joined a long line of gardeners going back generations who figured out the same secret. You don't win against weeds by working harder. You win by understanding them and then barely lifting a finger. If this helped you see your garden a little differently, subscribe and stick around, because next time we're getting into mulch itself, the right kind and the wrong kind, and the one common mulch that can actually rob your plants of nitrogen and stunt them if you use it wrong. You won't want to miss that one. Until then, keep that soil covered, keep that hoe sharp, and go easy on your knees. See you in the garden.